Kurt, the Prime Minister says the country's climate change policies will evolve without putting people's jobs at risk. Do you think he's striking a right balance in his response?
Well, the first thing to note is that Australia's climate policy has zero effect on the climate and zero effect on bushfires. Australia only contributes 1.3% of man's contributions to CO2, and that only represents 3% of overall emissions. The fact is that under the Paris Climate Agreement, Australia has already committed to the largest per capita cuts in the world, and none of the major emitters are constrained by the agreement. We know that China is increasing their emissions under the agreement. India is business as usual. The United States has withdrawn from the agreement, and none of the EU countries are on track to meet their obligations. So it makes absolutely no economic sense for Australia to go it alone and increase their reductions. And of course it will be economically harmful. Of course it will drive up electricity prices, and of course that will cost people jobs and inhibit the ability of businesses to thrive in the economy. So I think there is no common sense case to be made for Australia to increase the reductions.
Let's turn attentions to the Middle East now. And Scott Morrison says Australia's troops will remain in Iraq despite Iran's bombing US-led military bases in the country. Ebony, is that the right call?
Well, I think President Donald Trump's decision to assassinate a senior government official of a foreign government was the wrong call, and now it's left the Australian government with few options and no good options in the Middle East. And what's certain is that Australia does have extensive interests in the Middle East. We do have troops deployed in Iraq currently, and the more that we enact military options, the more we close off diplomatic options and a peaceful resolution to the issues currently facing the Middle East. So I think while it's difficult to say whether or not that's the right decision, certainly I don't think it makes any sense to withdraw troops from a theatre where there might be action there. That's hard to say what's the right call in the short term, but the President of the United States, his decision has precipitated all these decisions that Australia now must make in its own best interests, and certainly sending more troops in there is, I don't think, going to go down well with the public. After we've been involved in the Iraq war, we still have troops there. In the Afghanistan war, again, following America into the Middle East has never really worked out very well for Australia, and certainly always has faced enormous public opposition. So I think the government here is heading into quite difficult territory for itself because it doesn't really have many good options in front of it.
Kurt, the Prime Minister says his government remains focused on ensuring stability in Iraq. Do you think that can happen, given the ongoing tensions between Iran and the US?
I think it's a difficult position Australia finds itself in managing its alliance with the United States, which is of course very strong. And I think that the arguments that withdrawing troops will contribute to short-term destabilisation sort of miss the broader point here, and that I think is that US meddling in the Middle East has historically been bad, and regime change has not contributed to stabilisation in the region. And Australia's contribution to that has not been a force for good in our interest or in the interest of anyone, particularly in the Middle East. And I think that, of course, there are a lot of things to be weighed up in this decision of how we interact with the United States. But I think that the bigger picture here needs to be taken into account, and that is that the effects of the Iraq war are clearly have been damaging to the region and damaging for everybody involved.